Hey guys, welcome. Before we begin, I really want to thank everybody for supporting me on Patreon. This personal project is like I took some time off from commissioned work to make this personal project and roll it into a tutorial, and having some income from Patreon really allows me to do that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate everybody supporting me in that wall. That allows me to create more of this content. So thanks so much, everybody, especially Chris Hebert for being a top patron. But yeah, without further ado, let's dive into this project. It's been a while that I've done any bigger personal projects and did a tutorial about it, but hopefully this should make up for it. So hopefully, if you've seen my the video Spirit of Autumn, started out as I wanted to make a cool short thing, and it was intended to be a personal project that would take only like a couple of days. But since it turned out quite cool while I was working on it, it ended up taking a couple of weeks instead, and because I kept just adding stuff, which usually happens when I get enthusiastic with a personal project. And I thought it ended up really cool, so I really poured a lot of effort into it, and I think it turned out really cool. And now I decided to roll it out into a tutorial as well. So if you're new to Patreon, thanks a lot for subscribing. And I'm gonna go over in this tutorial over the project, just go through all of the notes, explain how I did certain things and why I did certain things. I'm not gonna build it from scratch, obviously, because I cannot really condense a couple of weeks of work and rebuild it basically. So I'm just gonna go through everything. From a technical point of view, it's not that complicated. It's just a lot of small elements. So I'm just going to go over it. And for me, it was also kind of a fun learning experience because I'm trying to get better at just like overall composition, color, lighting, shading. And this was something to like try to light a little bit better and stuff. So that's the introduction basically. Before we dive into the actual project file, I'm going to go over Vellum instancing, because that's something I used quite extensively in here to instance leaves, because that simulates a lot faster. And then once we've done that, we'll dive into the regular project file. So let me open up a new empty Houdini sequence, and let's dive into the Vellum instancing stuff. All right. So before we get started, I include a couple of Megascans assets which I used in the project. And of course I cannot include those because they're paid assets. They're quite cheap, but you need to, if you want to follow along and use the exact same materials, you need to get them from Megascans. I cannot include them, of course. So there's a document in the download folder which includes all of the assets I used. I think it's like 3, so it's not that many. But you need to define your path where Megascans downloads your assets and define it in here, and then everything should be loaded up properly. So you can just like go in Bridge and then search for those assets and then download those, and then everything should work. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's show what we're gonna make. Right, so as a first example, we're going to look at these falling leaves, which are also used in the end credits. So I'm going to go over how Vellum instancing works and why I did it. So I even used it in places where there's a pile of leaves to begin with. So in the beginning, for example, because it was faster to just scatter a whole bunch of instances and have those be affected by the velocities and the forces, then have a pile to begin with and create all kinds of constraints inside that thing. Was just faster overall to do with instances. So that's one of the first things that I built. I quickly discovered that it was going to be too heavy to have all of these thousands of leaves being simulated individually. So let's go over how something like this works. So let's first just make a very basic Vellum setup ourselves. So let's just do it in here. Let's create a grid. Scatter a couple of points on it. All right, and let's say something we want to emit. So let's do another grid. Let's give it, make it smaller, 1 by 1. So let's say we want to emit this thing. And then vellum cloth. Let's configure it as a cloth. And so call this geo, and then call this other thing constraints. And the points here, oh, not name, let's call this instance points. Right, now let's make a DOP network. Let's dive in, and let's make a vellum solver and a vellum object and a vellum source. All right. And what you can do in the vellum source, you can give it a geometry path, and we need to put it to instance on points. So let's give it a geometry, and let's give it constraints, and let's give it points to instance on. So that's what we're doing here. And let's create maybe a little bit less points, make it a little bit faster. And let's make this one a little bit lower resolution as well. All right. And let's change our seed. So let's put it in the seed. Let's put $f so it changes the seed every frame. Now you can see we're emitting instances. So let's add some forces here. Force. All right. And let's put some force down. And let's add some amplitude. Now you can see we're instancing vellum. So now we have falling grids basically. So these are just referring to one simple point. So that's the basics of just emitting that whole thing. Now let's dive into the other network and see how I switched up the leaves inside of the instance. So the way these assets get loaded in when you use the bridge, they're basically, so if you go in here, what it basically does is it loads in the source, so that's all of the leaves, and it splits it out to different geometries here. And then it sets up some instancing attributes. So if I go to instance, so if you look in this thing, you can see now we have a, so this is basically what it comes when you load this up. So it will just instance some leaves in here. So if you go into this instance thing, what it's basically doing, it's setting some instance paths. So this is just pointing to the original leaves. So what I did with some of the leaves is I added some custom animation, because it has some basic animation. If you go into the source, it has some animation parameters in here which will animate them. But what I also did is I added some, because I wanted more variance, because the leaves were quite flat in the beginning, so I added some bend, which is just driven by a wiggle. So we're going to the parameters. So this is this isn't. This one is driven by motion effects. So you can see this is just this is driven by chops. So I did that in a couple of them, not every single one, but some have like animated bends. Here's another one. So this won't come true in the simulation itself, but it will come true on the instances that are on the ground, basically. So yeah, those are the basic instances. So it just defines a path, and then instance sub will instance them on it, and this one will do it another way. So it will put OP in front of it, and then it will be this, and then you can create it into regular geometry. So what I was first doing is I was creating I was first trying to just do it like this and then just throw this in a simulation, but that gets really, well, maybe I can show you. This gets very clunky very quickly. Wait, let's put solver, vellum solver. Right, there we go. So maybe it'll work fine, but a lot of overlapping stuff will just be very slow, and without instances it will just get very clunky very quickly. Let's check if it's gonna give any issues here. Maybe it might not, but instancing is gonna be a lot faster. This actually seems to work quite fine with this amount of instances, but if you have more, it might give some issues. Anyway, so on to the instancing workflow. So I haven't found a way to switch instances inside of Vellum itself. So what I ended up doing, so if I go into this network here, I'm using the Quixel assets, by the way, simple scattering assets, which are quite nice. So I'm scattering some points here. So I have a grid, just scattering a couple of points. And then it's using a wrangle here to give it a random ID. So basically it's checking the number of points of the first input. So this has packed objects, so these just count as points. So it's gonna check how many points do I have. So it's gonna be 9 points. And this is gonna give it an ID. So as you can see, you have an ID from 0 to 8. Defining age here because I want to age my stuff, because in the main thing I'm also fading some in. Defining p-scale here, even though that also happens here, but I just ended up doing it over there. And I'm having it in a little subnet over here, which has two different inputs. So I'm gonna do a for each. So I'm gonna do for each ID. And I have this this whole bunch here, and then I'm basically going to remove everything that's not equal to the ID that I generated. So if it's ID 0, then I'm gonna remove everything that's called ID 0. And then based on that, I'm putting them in a network here. So basically this just this ends up generating one leaf and one constraint, and the other thing goes into first input, and this has all of the points. So this just generates all of the points, group points, and again this only has the 0th ID. So then in this subnet, what you get is you get the leaf, you get constraints, and you get the instance points. So I'm just doing that individually for every single leaf. So I have a couple of networks here. So if there's an easier way to do this by varying instances in Vellum, maybe there is. I don't know. I haven't found a way to do that. So I'm generating constraints and points for everything. So if I go in here, we just up these points. So you can see if I go in here, so these will get leaf 1, these will get leaf 2, these will get leaf 3, and for some reason this is now empty. Oh no, there they are. Leaf 4, etc, etc, etc. And then if you go into, I can delete this thing, there's a leftover thing. So I can go in here, and then what I'm doing is I just have multiple Vellum sources, and I'm just referencing them to the subpath, the constraint path, and the instance point path, and they all get instanced like this. And then in here I just have a null that says the start frame, and basically that's because I'm also using this instancing on some places where, for example, I only wanted to emit from the first frame to just pile them up. So I could, for example, also say, because if I'm so let's dial the points down before the whole thing will basically freeze. So if I'm gonna emit this now, it will emit all of these leaves. But if I say $f equals 1, then it will only equal 1 on the first frame, and after that it won't. So then it only emits on one frame. I could also say $f below 10, so So then it will only emit the first 10 frames. So let's put it to 10 again, because if I do that, then I could put this up to like 1000, for example, and then if I go in here, so now I'm emitting a whole bunch of leaves, and they only emit on the first frame. So that's basically the gist of how the leaf emitting was done. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the main scene and talk about how the main scene was built and of the individual elements. But this was the main interesting part of it. So see you there. Alright, so we're back in the main scene. And again, you need to define the paths and everything. So let's look through our render cam. And this scene is quite heavy and might freeze every now and then and get quite unstable. I had a ton of freezes throughout the making of this whole thing. So let me, if I turn on all of the elements, rain. So it needs to think a little bit. So that's the entire thing. So let's turn off a couple of these things. All right. So let's go over all of the individual things. All right. So let's first things first. Let's go into the ground. So the ground is very simple. It's just a it's a ground. It's basically how the ground was made. It's just a grid. Then mountain subdivided the whole thing, another mountain sub, add some detail, UV project, so I get some UVs on the top. Erode, I didn't end up using this. I was, when I was first trying it out, what I wanted to be, because the eagle and the whole thing came later, in the thought process. First I just wanted leaves to float up and then like spikes emerging, so I thought I was going to use an erode to like drive that in the shader. Like the displacement. I didn't end up using that, so you can ignore that basically. Yeah, that's basically the ground, so that's quite simple. The second thing is the orb. So orb is also quite simple. So let's check that. So this is the orb, and it gets extruded a little bit, so it has some thickness. And it gets UV'd with the auto UV thing, because that's just easy. Yeah, scaled up a little bit over here, and I'm just using material fracture, which is quite slow, but it's just a very simple fracture, and it just made sense to do it. So I have some pieces, then I'm transferring normals. And I'm putting the normals in here and multiplying it by noise and outputting it to velocity. So I'm getting some velocity on the pieces. Not sure if that wants to visualize, but there's velocity pointing out. So that's sometimes I'm not sure why these visualizations sometimes just bug out. Which is very weird, because it does have velocity. You can see. Anyway, not really that big of a deal, but it's weird. It's probably a bug. Anyway, so it does have like velocities, and this thing just gets added into a very simple DOP simulation. So just an RBD solver, some drag, and then the RBD packed object, and it has inherent velocity from point velocity turned on. What it will do is it will take the velocity that I generated in here, so it's gonna look at the normals. So these normals, wait, maybe I can show you if I put this to normals as well. Really not sure, like I really hate why the visualization often just breaks. Anyway, so it will generate velocities, and then it will add those velocities to the orb. So that'll make it explode outwards, basically. And this whole thing starts at frame 1, and I'm currently working at a different frame. I started off with just a 1 to 1, like 200 frame range, but that's a bad idea, and I tend to not do it. But this was supposed to be a simple project, so I ended up later moving all of the keyframes. But that's why this thing is still set to frame 1. Anyway, so yeah, so as you can see, it's just an exploding orb, quite simple. Then it gets clamped to first frame here. What happens here is, so here we have the transform, which is animating it upwards and tilting it back slightly. The tilting is because I also have some dirt later. You don't really see it in the render, but it comes out of the ground and there's dirt, and that needs to roll off of it. And then the transform pieces here is basically what it's doing. If you look when it explodes, it transforms it down. So then it ends up just being some points. The way that works is transform pieces will take input geometry, and then you can use p-scale, for example, to transform them down. So that's how I did that. Because when I initially started the project, I just thought it was just going to be an exploding orb with some dust coming out of it. The whole bird thing idea came later. So yeah, I'm just trailing it, and I have some velocity on it, and that's basically the basic orb stuff. Right. So yeah, that's basically the well, that's the orb, and that's the orb that's gonna drive a lot of the a lot of the stuff. So what's a good thing to do? Oh yeah, let's first go over the grains. So I did some grains, so let's look up our grain simulation. Grains. There we go. So let's dive in here. All right, so yeah, so if we go in here, yeah, basically what I'm doing is I take the ground mesh. So let's go over here, and I have a box where I want sort of a boundary area to be, and then I'm booleaning out just a piece of it, and then I'm merging a sphere into it, which you don't really see that much. It's like a little bulge. That's basically what it is. And then over here, do another boolean with the orb, so you don't have the geometry over there. Remeshing the whole thing, and then I'm just doing grains. So let's turn down the resolution for now, because this is going to be quite heavy. So let's copy this size and let's put it just to 1. Maybe to right, so this is just creating some points, and well, constraints are also just going to be the points, but what I did is I just added a turbulence noise and put it to attraction weight. So that what that will do is, you can see it in the color as well. Maybe if I put it to background dark, so you see some color. So the attraction weight will get it to clump, so that will have the sand particles clump together. And then if I go into, so I'm using vellum grains. So let's go in there, and let's see what that will do. So again, now we're just looking at a very low resolution sim. So I'm importing the sphere there, and let's wait until it moves up. Let's look what this is gonna do. So this is just loading the grains here, so geometry and constraints. It's just a very basic vellum setup, so I didn't really do anything really custom here. But this just creates a sand simulation. So if you revert this back to a high resolution one, which has a ton of points, and then if I load it here, then basically what you're gonna get is it's still not super high res, but well, it was quite far away. So how many points is this? It's 370,000 points. So you can see there's some, it's coming out of the sand. And then I'm just deleting some stuff on top. I'm time shifting it to basically to clamp to the last frame, so that it'll stick to being this frame. Then I'm creating a VDB out of it, and then I'm smoothing the VDB, and then I'm converting it to a mesh. So let's go in here. So yeah, this is a little slow to generate. So, but I meshed it out. So that's so this is basically what that looks like. And again, we're seeing it from quite far away, so it doesn't really matter that much that it's a little bit jittery. And if you visualize it with the orb, where do we have the orb? Do we have the orb here somewhere? Yeah, there we have it. All right. So we have that pulling out, and now it looks a little bit like mud, but again, doesn't really matter for this. Oh, and then what I'm doing here is I'm just transferring the UV. I didn't really need that proper UVs for this because it was barely visible, but this way I at least get like some UVs which are transferred from the ground. So that's the mud, and this also goes into the collision geometry. So let's go into that, and then we'll start talking about the leaves. So let's go into the ground collision. So what I have here is I have this thing that I made, and I booleaned out the top, because what I want to do is I have my ground here, and I'm merging these two together. Let's look what that looks like. And I'm just raying a grid on it. So let's just put out a null so I can easily visualize it. So this will basically just give me this. And you might think, why the fuck am I doing this? Well, this is going to be less heavy to... If I cache this out, this is only going to be 3.73 megabytes per frame, and this is going to be 210. So this is going to be faster to load in as a collision geometry in all of the simulations. So I just cache that out. So then I just have a grid which does this. So I can use that as a collision. So at least the leaves get pushed up a little bit. It's not really that visible, and then I have a time blend here, because without a time blend it cannot generate substeps. Let's see what this is doing. Wasn't even using the proper frame range, so I guess it wasn't even using it in the final simulation, I guess. Oh, it is. Okay. Right, there we go. Let's go to... Alright, so I guess it wasn't even using it in the final simulation. It's a funny discovery. Right, anyway, but now it is, so there's that. Yeah, so let's continue. Alright, so let's dive into one of the sims, and again, I already went over a lot of this stuff. So it's just creating some points and then doing this whole things with the leaves. But actually, the interesting thing is that I'm also using some wedges. So if we go in here, as you can see, this is the vortex. But actually, these are 10 different simulations merged together. And the reason why I did this, because if I had a very big pile of leaves, a lot of stuff would start interpenetrating. And then I need a ton of substeps, and constrained iteration would just get super slow. So what I just did is I ran a lot of wedges. So as you can see, these are all of the different wedges, and just merging them together. This would make the whole thing a lot faster, and I could just later, when I wanted to do the final sim, I would just crank up the wedge count to 10, and then everything would work like that. So yeah, I'm doing here in the on top, and I actually discovered maybe a bug when I was recording this. I'm not sure, because right now I'm using attribute names to evaluate these values in here. So if I click in here, you can see changes, but I actually didn't do that in my original file. And now I had to do it because it was certainly not working. So maybe it's something that changed between Houdini builds. But anyway, I digress. So basically what I'm doing is, if you create a wedge in here, you can point it to parameters and say it has to be between certain values and the wedge count, and then you can point them in here to the certain value and put them in seed in here. And again, I didn't need to do the add seed before, so I'm not sure what changed. First I could just point it to it and it would work, but for some reason right now it wasn't evaluating, so I changed that. There might be a bug, I don't know. Anyway, so what this will do is we'll just create 10 different values for the seed, for example, between 0 and 100,000. And so if I click these wedges, you can see the number change. Put it to random samples. And let's cook this again. So if you do Shift V, it'll cook that, and it will take a while. Because they actually do need to be random samples. But again, I just changed this up a little bit just now because for some reason it was working. So let's wait for this to finish. Right. So again, now you can see I get random seeds. And so that way I can run multiple simulations and just merge them together. So the way I merge those together later is what I do is I just create one point here. So a single point. Then I copy them by the total of 10. So this is just linked to this parameter. So then I get 10 points. As you can see, 10 points. Then I do a point, or a connectivity for a point. And then I'm looping over each individual point. And I created a metadata import. And then over here in the file node, I'm looking at the detail attribute, so I'm just looking at the iteration. So this has an attribute called iteration, so that's the current iteration that it's on. And that will also correspond to the wedge number. So then if I put it to here, to the which version do I want, so I just have a slider for the version. And then to the wedge. Then so you can see here are all my 10 wedges. There are 11 wedges apparently, for the final one that I did. So then what that will do is it will load in all of the wedges and then it will merge them together. So then you get this whole cool thing. And then in here in the ROP network, so this will also change some other parameters. I'm also changing something in here in the multi value. So this the at multiplier. So this will go between 0.9 and 1.12. And this, I have some values here and they are multiplied by this global parameter. So every simulation that I run will have slightly different values inside of it. So I will go over these a little bit later. And this can be deleted, by the way. So anyway, I think this can be deleted as well. I have some cleanup left to do. Anyway, so that's how the wedging in here works. So yeah, let's go into the simulation itself. Alright, so let's dive into the simulation stuff. So this only gets a minute in one frame, and I'm copying the whole thing over here when I go to Venom Sim. So I'm copying the thing here with a little bit of rotation, so I would get some more leaves to stack up a little bit. Anyway, so let's look at this. So it will collide with the ground. So again, this is our ground collider that we made before, and this is our orb collider. They need to be surface collisions, else it won't work. Again, because Vellum uses surface collisions, so point-based collisions, not volume collisions. Right. So I have a couple of forces here. So this is just a general sort of force here that just blows the leaves around a little bit. But a lot of the other ones are put on groups. So this is put on stick, this is put on isn't put on anything, and this only goes on a certain frame. So we have a subsolver here. So yeah, let's dive into the subsolver, and this will put a class on it. So every leaf will get its own class. It gets promoted to point, and then we have a primitive wrangle here. Actually, you call it point wrangle because I'm doing it over points. But again, it was when I was making it. So it will create a random value based on the class. So that value will be it will be between 0 and 1. And then in here I have a group expression which is grouping the points. And let's see what this looks like. And why is it? Yeah, there we go. Alright, let's remove this. So as you can see, for some reason, if I have it keyframed, it wasn't doing anything. So this is randomly grouping these leaves. For some reason, I cannot see it when it's scrubbing. So this will randomly grab them. And so this will be the stick group. And then the other one is I'm transferring a attribute called noise force, which is generating outward from the center. So I just have a point here and it's generating outwards. So slowly it's animating outwards. As you can see here, so this is just, so if I put it in a color, you can see it. Let's rem from attributes, noise force. Right. So you can see I have an attribute like moving outward like that. And then I'm grouping it. So if noise force is bigger than 0, then group noise force equals 1. All right. So what that will mean is if something is not in the stick attribute, it will, so if something is in the stick group, it will apply this force. If it, so this is an axis force, will have it twirl around and move upward. If it's like not in the, so if it's in the noise force, it will apply this this noise basically. So this is just this will just move them around because it's just a just an animated noise. Another one here, regular pop force, which slowly gets bigger. This gets applied to the entire thing. This gets only applied like during the time when the orb is exploding. So this just creates a very short vortex. And this isn't then this one has the same thing, and it will blast them outwards, and it only gets applied when the orb is exploding. So this is just based on the freeze frame. So it might be a little bit confusing with all of these groups, but basically what they're doing is they're just controlling that a randomized amount will move based on the wind. So you can see you have a couple like slowly like moving, sort of as if they're controlled by wind, and they will get more and more. And then when the orb starts flying upwards, and the attribute will spread, and then they will start being affected by the axis force, which will start pushing them upwards. So that's this one. So this is also, if we can, so the shape starts over the radius of 0, and if I just keep it playing, we'll see it will grow out, and then it'll start picking them up based on the stick group. So we need to wait for a couple of more frames, and then it'll start doing that. So bear with me. All right, there we go. So there you can see it starts growing. And initially not a lot is happening yet, but you can see there's starting to be a little bit of movement. and then everything starts moving upwards and doing cool things. So yeah, that's how the basically how most of the sims in here work. So it's a lot of stuff is a copy from this, but this one uses the wedging, and a lot of the other stuff don't use the wedging. So again, now we can clean a lot of this stuff up, because a lot of these were also test setups. So, but a lot of So a lot of these things use the same sort of setup. So if I look at this, so this is stuff that's scattered on the front. So you can there's like a couple of leaves that are moving in the wind, sort of like blowing around, and then they will sort of move upwards and then get pulled in. So again, that also uses a subsolver. Let's dive in there. Again, class, fly up, and if it's in a group fly up, it will add a count, and then if so add count 0.1, and if count is greater than 1, then active leave equals 1, blah 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 blah. So this basically what this does is it will add a force that will blow them up, sort of in the up direction, for a couple of frames, and then they will sort of started getting added into the vortex. So let's so for example, if I put this up farther, let's then you can see what I mean. And let's turn down the seed for this. Let's the total count, so it's gonna be a little bit faster to see what's going on. Right. So let's put it to auto update. Let's do compute of this stuff first. Right. There we go. So this is gonna fall down. There we go. So we have some falling leaves. Right, so as you can see, now I opened the count, you can see some leaves just get blown upwards, like a lot. So they just keep moving upwards. So this one is moving them upwards. That's because they are in that group. So if you put it down again, so it will only happen for a couple of, if I put it to 1, it will only happen for 10 frames. So they slowly move. So that was to do so they wouldn't just get pulled instantly in the vortex. I wanted them to move like this. So up and then into the vortex. So just a small detail. And again, all of the other stuff here is just just adding more forces, and like you can go through this. Just basically it was just me adding forces and like tweaking it to try to get it to look the way I wanted to, but nothing game-changingly different inside of this network than the other one. So another one is the emit sides, and again this is also somewhat the same. So a lot of the stuff is the same. So what we have here is this so some points, and there's points being generated on the, so I have a tube and I have a grid. So there's points being scattered on both. So just different seed every frame. And then this is all sort of the same. And then it gets added in here with a lot of the same forces. But we'll just like suck them inwards and then does some timing stuff, and then it will blow out. So all of these things are like somewhat the same. Fly front, blah blah blah. So this is not that interesting. It's just a lot of these elements, you just make them separately and then add them up, and it's way better to do it separately than doing it in one simulation, because this is just more controllable. And I just started stacking up different elements to create something that I thought looked really cool. And in the end, it all looks like one big simulation, but it's split up into multiple parts. So something you might have noticed is that a lot of the simulations, and basically all of them, have this pop effect by volumes, and that is generated by the bird. So I didn't make the bird myself. So let's dive in the bird, and we have it here. The very nice animated bird. I didn't make this. It was made by this guy, Asim3D. So shout out to him. So this was the bird that I used. I'm not a character animator. I'm not that great of a modeler, so I just got this model and I animated it along a path myself. So shout out to him. But this was also used to generate velocities that drive the leaves. So let's dive into how that was done. All right. So let's look at this this bird. So all right. So we have this bird here doing like this. So it's I did animate it a little bit myself in the beginning. So like the start animation, like it grows and it spreads out its wings, and then it just switches to the main animation. I did it in Cinema 4D. I just tweaked the bones a little bit, so it's just very simple. Just animated the bones. And then what I did is so it wasn't really looking as majestic as like this as I wanted to, so I stretched out the wings to be bigger. So as you can see, there's a difference here between this, and I was gonna scatter leaves on it anyway, so funky geometry doesn't matter, and this just gets blend shaped into each other, so like that. Then we have a bird. And then what I did is I have a path here. So if you look at this, so this is the path that it flies. So it just gets converted to a. So I just drew with a curve, and I converted it to NURBS curve. And I'm converting it, resampling the points, blah 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 blah, polyframe, whatever. But then what I'm doing is how I'm animating it across the. So polyframe is meant to set the tangent. So I'm setting the normals in the direction of the curve. So if you put polyframe and you put tangents to normal, then it'll set the normals into like across to follow the curve. So anyway, so then what I'm doing is like smoothing it a little bit, and then I'm carving it. So I have the second U set to be the first U, but with a little bit added to it. And then what you get is it just carves it. So I'm just animating that. So maybe if you can see. So it will animate like across the curve. So if you do copy to points, if I put this in here, put the sphere in here. No, not the spectrum. Keep always accidentally adding the spectrum. Right. So that will just basically animate the curve. So then I can animate it across the curve, and it will get added into the direction of the curve because of the normal. And then I'm blasting away one of the points, so I'm left with only one point. And then I'm animating the bird on it, and then we have a nice flying bird. And after that, I'm switching it on and off, like after a certain thing, else it'll try to scatter the leaves on it even after the bird has disappeared, and then you get like a pile of leaves there. So that's why the switch is there. Oh, and this other is the bird center. So that's why the like that we have the light in center of the bird. I will go into this later when we're talking about lighting. That might be a better way to go about it. Anyway, so this bird also generates velocities. So let's dive into how these velocities work. Right, so if we go into the eagle falling leaves node, so this is where the velocity gets generated basically. So I just did a very simple pyrosim for this. So if we go in here, so the eagle gets merged in here. So let's look at that. So yeah, we have the eagle here, and then I'm just creating density from it. So this is basically density that I'm creating. And then I have a pyrosim here. This is almost a completely shelf tool thing. And it's super low resolution, but I'm only gonna use it for the velocity anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just like sourcing the bird into it, and so it's sourcing, so it's basically it's creating wind. So this is basically just using Pyro to create velocity that can drive the wind. So you can see it's super low resolution, and it's super fast to sim. But then you get this. So this is basically from the bird, and this is gonna affect all of our simulations. So let's go back to what I cached out for that. So if you'd scatter some points in here, and right, scatter a couple of points, only do it in the density, I guess, and then do volume trail. And I have these points, and I'm gonna trail the one velocity volumes. Right. So now you can see I get these trails. So as you can see, this is basically what the bird is doing. This looks pretty cool by itself. Actually, I should render this. So this is getting used in every simulation to drive the leaves. So for example, if I have the so if I go in which one? Let's do the regular one. Let's put it to single pass because that's going to be faster. So you like falls down, and then as you can see there it's where our bird passes by, so then it gets blown up, and then it gets like this, also gets blown to the camera, so that's quite cool. And then when you have a ton of leaves, that looks super cool. So I really loved how that turned out. In my first, like one of my earlier iterations, I just had the bird go out and then fly to the camera, and it just looked way too fast. And this was a lot more work to add into it, but it really looked, yeah, I mean, really adds to the whole thing in my opinion. So yeah, basically that's all of the velocities are done, and those are added into every single simulation. Alright, so that thing gets added basically everywhere. So here's another sim that I did. It's a box here, volume, scatter some points in it. And when we go in here, basically what it does is just it emits points in it. So let's look at that. And then it has the same sort of type forces, so the axis forces and some other stuff, and the pop effect by volume again. Apparently it has a double pop effect by volume for some reason, I'm not sure why. So these are the very tiny particles that are flowing around, which you don't really see that much, but they're like a little bit in a depth of field. I did have them bigger at some point, but they just didn't look good. So yeah, but again, everything that happens is being affected by the Pyro simulation, and that just creates these really cool effects like this, for example. Like the shockwave you have when the orb explodes. So you have like the fly front effect, and then so you have like that stuff happening. Actually, the shockwave was just with a I think with a pop attract. It wasn't done with the velocity. So that was, if you go in this one, I think that was where is it? This one, like it gets activated, it has a lot of force, because it just looked really cool to have it like shoot backwards, it really get blasted out. Anyway, but I digress. So let's continue on some other stuff. So we have another simulation, which is where we also generated the velocity. So if we're back here, into where we created the smoke. And another thing I did here is I'm loading the bird, and I'm just scattering points on the bird, and I'm then adding them into another simulation here, which just has like these leaves just falling. And again, you can see these are being advected from the get-go, like really cool by the smoke. So you have these lovely twirls, and everything is just all of these small details really add to the whole thing, in my opinion. So yeah, that's the last of the actual simulations, I think. Let me go through the whole thing again. Oh, there's another one, like small grain. You don't really see this actually that much. Well, you see it a little bit. It's a couple of points, just grains falling from the orb when it's falling down. It was just like as if sand would fall down, but it is a very small element to it. And another element that I have, which I added later after the final render was done, because the entire thing was rendered in one go and there's hardly any compositing. But this thing was added later because I felt I needed more of a shockwave. So what I did is I have this. So it's so this is what creates sort of airflow effect when the bird explodes. And again, this is a super low resolution sim, but it just creates so I have a sphere. Where is it? Why am I not? Oh, wait. I need to load this in proper, because I did this in a separate scene initially, and then I merged it in here later to share it with you guys. Right. So I have that, and I'm just creating a just points and then a source, and I'm just putting it in a pyro simulation, which actually uses combustion because I wanted expansion in the whole thing. And we have the ground loaded in, and the way the ground is used as a collision volume here, because you need volume collisions. So just have an extrude volume there, and then that's loaded in here. Anyway, so this just like it has a lot of fuel added in the beginning and a lot of temperature, and then it just gets animated down. And I just try to time the whole thing with the camera moving backwards. And then in here, I don't think I did any keyframes, but the whole thing like it has a lot of gas release, and the burn rate is super high, so the whole thing expands like super fast, and just uses a lot of the basic shelf tool things. And then we just get this expanding smoke thing, which is used for the to create a cool wind blowing effect. So yeah, then we get this. Where do we go? It's a very short simulation as well. And then I'm also using that inside of a pop simulation, and that blasts these points. So yeah, that's then we also have these points. And then the thing that I'm using in the shader later is I have some alpha here, so that it just gets ramped in based on the age. So it has some, it fades out a little bit and does some stuff. See? And a little bit of random P scale again, also for the shader. And this one can be removed. Alright, so one more thing I almost forgot to mention is we have, of course, also the main eagle. Yeah, there's this guy over here. So yeah, what we have here is we have the eagle loaded in. Have him remeshed here, and then I'm scattering points on him, and then point deforming it. So then we get just the points flapping. So they, like, if I wouldn't do the point deform, then they would like start scattering everywhere every frame. And I have like this one set to curvature and add some more on the wings. And I'm creating these instances. I did these as geometry. So we have the leaves here. And I did these as geometry because I wanted them to also be able to sort of animate. So if I do a time shift, so you can see I have a Noid animating through it. So it would be like simulate sort of wind going through it a little bit. And we need to do that based on a rest position. So I'm time shifting a frame here, and then I'm creating a rest position. And then I'm doing it based on the rest position of the second input. So where is it? Where am I loading the rest position? Let's look. Ah, there we go, rest, and it's going from the second input. And for some reason I am doing this from the wrong input, so it should go in here. Doesn't make that much of a difference, but then you have the you have the bird here, and then I'm trailing it, of course, because I want velocity, and then I'm adding alpha because I'm using alpha in the shader. So every node that has leaves needs to have alpha set in, else it won't work in the shader later on. Right, so let's continue. Oh, another thing that I still needed to mention is I have this RobNet here. And this merges all of the ROPs, and you can run the whole thing in one go. So it just references all of these things. So if you want to simulate the whole thing, just run this RobNet, and then everything should work basically. Should just run in one go. You need to run the Vellum separately for the vortex. So just so you know. All right. So yeah, let's start rendering some stuff. So let's open up the Redshift render view. So the way I usually set stuff up is I create render nodes, which load all of the stuff, and then I do some, if I need to change some parameters in there, I will do that in there. So I will just load them from the simulation into a render node, and then I have all of the render stuff in there. And this is set up with RNDR, and then do it like this. So if I go to the out menu and you go to Orb Leaves, so everything that has RNDR underscore and then a star gets picked up by the render. So it doesn't matter if I don't have to manually select them in here. As long as I call something RNDR, then it will render. And then I do the same with lights. So everything that's called RSL will be picked up as a light. So if I decided I don't want a light, I could just like change the change the name, and then it'll be excluded. But this kind of makes it nice to, like, if I want to add like one other light, I could just add it manually in here. But I like this to keep things organized. So yeah, let's find a frame. Let's render a frame. The whole thing is like quite slow, if I have to be honest. Right, so let's go in here. Right, so this looks okay, and let's press render, and then hopefully it doesn't crash. All right, there we go. So as you can see, basically the entire thing is rendered in one go. So let's go over some things, and hopefully this should keep recording properly. So I'm doing some depth of field, as you can see. So this is my render camera. The way depth of field is done is I have Redshift camera. It's all rendered in render, because I found with a lot of like small elements and front end particles, like it doesn't look good when you do it in compositing, and then I rather render it. So this is looking at vector length to origin. so the origin of the camera, and then it's gonna look at orb animate sim. So it's gonna look at the orb and it's gonna stay focused on the orb. So it just looks at where the orb is basically. So it's always focused on the orb. And another thing that I have is I have this bokeh image, which just looks kind of cool. So let me grab that. So it's basically this image. So it does a little bit of sort of a chromatic aberration type look, and it does actually sort of significantly change the image. So if I turn it off, see, it does look a little bit different. Actually, not as bad as I thought it might. I actually tried also making a bokeh, which would be the look of a leaf, but I didn't end up doing that. So yeah, let's go over some of the lighting. I'm trying to get better at lighting. I was quite happy how the lighting in this one turned out, especially compared to what it started off in the beginning. All right, so I have a couple of lights. So the top light that's the basic light here. So that's hopefully this will allow me to. So everything is like quite slow. It's like quite a heavy scene with all of the leaves. So as you can see, that's a light coming from the top there, and also affects the volumetrics. Like I have volumetric scattering in the render. So how that is done is, if I go in here, so just global illumination basically is just I use brute force. And the way why I use brute force is in the previous project I was using Irradiance point cloud, and that worked quite well up until a certain point, and then it started going out of VRAM, and then I couldn't figure out why it was constantly crashing. With brute force, at least it continues rendering, and because I had so many little leaves going on, I figured for the hell of it, let's just render it as brute force. It rendered quite fast. It was between like 3 and 7 minutes per frame, I think, for the final thing. Anyway, I'm using volumetric scattering. So that's enabled with some settings. Not sure what else I should say about that. And then I have a volume shader here, which I'm in here. So I'm just using noise, a little bit of noise in here, which will make it a little bit less uniform, and you can just put it in the volume tab. So for example, if I would make this black, you will probably see some sort of a difference. I think I need to reload the sequence if I do this. There you go. You can see then it becomes more defined. So there's just a little bit of noise going on inside of the shader, which just helps breaking up everything just a little bit. And didn't end up using that. Right. So that's how the volume, and I liked having everything in render. I just wanted the whole thing to render in one go. So that's the top light. I have the leaf light volume, which is the light coming from here. I used to have a light coming like that from the top, but a friend of mine said it didn't really look good, so I ended up changing that a little bit. So if I just increase the exposure here, you can see which one that is. So you can see that is basically filling that in. It just looks pretty cool in my opinion. All right, so we have a rim light, which is creating. You cannot really see it in the progressive mode, but it creates sort of a rim around this orb. And so if you're doing stuff like that, you kind of want to create a like a region render. And I mean, Redshift is super fast, but like if you're dealing with like heavy scenes like this, it's still it can be quite slow. Right. So let's go to bucket mode. light render. Right, so yeah, so you have this little rim over there. So let's go to a so particle lights. Basically, this is just a light dome, and it's only put on the wind particles. So those are those particles. I just wanted them to be sort of visible all of the time. I didn't want them to really be affected by a lot of the other lighting. So I just used enable light mass associations and just select them, render wind particles, and then that will basically just light them out as being sort of white, but they're like very subtle. So that worked quite well for what I wanted to do. Right, so let's focus on the bird. So this is another frame. You can see the bird, and the bird has this light inside of it. I wanted it to be sort of the, we have the light orb moving down in the beginning, which is the aerosol fall down. So, and all of the glows, by the way, are just done with post effects. I'm rendering them directly to the file. Anyway, so this thing, I wanted to be sort of sort of its life essence, like the glowy heart type of thing. And that's this one. So it's RSL bird light. So it's a spherical light and it's not visible, but it does have like volume contribution. So if I were to put this up, then you can see what it does. So let's wait for it to do things again. So you can see that's with the what that is doing. And I have like the volume samples are set a little bit higher for this one. Because the thing is, if you have volume samples on the light super low and you crank up the unified sampler, so the max samples in here, what that ends up doing is creating splodges. So you need also to up your volume samples if you're doing stuff like this. If you do 16 here and then crank it up here with your max samples, it will sort of, because it won't have enough samples, and then it will sort of oversample all of these individual things. I cannot show it in this example. I have another tutorial coming up quite soon, which will go into more detail on that, because that had a lot of volumetrics as well. But anyway, you will see that later. So yeah, the way this tracks the bird, so let me turn this off, go to scene view, I'm going to transform. So this will look at the centroid of Eagle Animate Bird Center, and that's what I mentioned before. So basically what this does is, so it clamps to the first frame. So this is the first frame, and then this animates as you should expect. And then what I'm doing is I'm blasting away two points inside of the eagle. So you have this eagle, and basically it's a point on his bottom and on his front. So it's sort of where his heart would be, I imagine. I'm creating a line. So you have this line inside of this eagle, and I'm resampling it to have an extra point. And that extra point will be exactly in the center. And then I'm blasting away everything except for that point. And then I have the exact center of this bird. I was trying with like just a regular centroid of the bird before, but the thing is, when you do that, it will, because the bird, like the wings are flapping, so they're flapping. And then what that will do is, like I will show you with a bound. Like if I refer to the center of this thing, the center is always changing. Like if I were to assemble, I can show you. So I pack this and then edit and just create the centroid. So just keep the center point and then copy to point. Right. So, and then if I visualize the bird, and make this a little bit smaller. So as you can see, this is not really working. It's like it's moving. So that's why you need something like this to keep it nice and centered. Right. So yeah, that's doing the center of the bird light, and that's doing the thing. And all of the other lights, like I have a ton of other lights. So I have this orb light, for example, and that is in the center of the orb. And this wiggles a little bit. I think I'm not using even. I was using a multiplier thing for it before. Oh, I am. Sorry. I'm not. No. But yeah, all of the lights and the flickering the lights, a lot of it is really done in render, so not necessarily in comp. I have some extra flicker and stuff going on in comp. Most of it is it's actually done in render. So yeah, these are all of the lights, and I haven't used any HDRI. I really wanted it to also be sort of a lighting exercise for myself. So yeah, these are all of the lights. Oh, and this light bird top, that's basically a light that's used to fill in when the bird comes close to the camera. So if I have this thing here, let's visualize the correct. Let's visualize the correct frame. So then it will. Why is this not working? Oh, I still have the time shift on. All right, so what this basically does is when the bird will come in, it fills in the bird a little bit. So let's render that frame. Let's wait for it to fire up again, which again is quite slow. That's the thing with Redshift is super fast, but when you have heavy scenes, time to first pixel isn't that great. Hopefully with like Hydra, it'll coming soon in Houdini 18. Hopefully that'll speed things up a little bit, because as you can see, this takes like quite a while, right? So you can see like the nice light from the heart of the bird. So if I exposure this up, you should probably be able to see what I mean. This might also overdo it significantly. Yeah, so you can see like this. This just lights up the bird. Let's turn it down again. So if I turn it off, I'm not sure how big of a difference it'll make, but let's wait for it to do things. Yeah, you can see now it's a little bit darker. And just use it to fill in the lights a little bit with the for the bird. So yeah, that was basically I think most of the lighting. Yeah. So as I guess again, I haven't used any of the any HDRIs. It was all manual lighting. Another thing that I want to mention with the camera is the way I did the camera animation. So let's turn off the Eagle Main and let's turn on the ground. So with the camera animation and being pushed back by the shockwave here. So there's not a lot of wiggle on it, but like it's basically a camera animation, but then I have a little bit of wiggle on the rotation and the translation. What I usually do is I have a main null which doesn't really do a lot, so I just only use that to center the camera a little bit more. And then I have one in between which does wiggles, which is nice because if I wanted to stack wiggles, I could just add an extra null, and then I could just like add another one with more noise. And why is not doing motion back? Nice. There we go. And then you can see you can just stack it that way. So that's highly preferable to doing it on the camera itself directly. There is a little bit of wiggle, by the way, because that was used for the orientation. I kind of needed that to be there. So that's how the camera was done. Alright, now let's quickly dive into a couple of shaders. Oh, and another thing, I have a global multiplier here, which I used, I think, on some lights, where I'm multiplying the intensity by the global multiplier. First I was like also fading in lights and fading out lights based on this, but I didn't end up using that until the end. But oh, another thing is the volume wind, so the stuff in here is just rendered with a separate in the subnet, and has separate lights. So those are those lights, because it was a separate element, and I didn't wanna, like, it didn't look good with the regular lighting that I had. I was gonna comp it in anyway, so that's what I did. And another thing that I did is I have a version number here, so everything is just being output to basically to a version and the name, and then it all ends up in the correct location. I can just version up in this one, and then it'll when I render it, it will just end up in the correct location. And the AOVs are done in here, just all the basic AOVs. I ended up comping on the beauty, so I didn't really use a lot of this. I did end up using the Cryptomatte, but for the most part, not a lot of AOVs. Like, I really tried to getting as far as I could just in the regular render. Alright, so let's continue. Alright, so a couple of more things about the shading, but the shading was actually quite simple. Not a lot going on. So the main material that I'm using for the ground is, so if you go in here, so it's beach floor. So that's that one, and it's a, if you look it up, it's a Megascans asset. So it's this one, but I am mixing some displacement from something else. And again, I fucking hate that bug. So I'm mixing in some displacement from, no, not from that entire path. Let's copy it properly. So I'm mixing in some displacement from this one, because I didn't like the way the displacement just looked on the regular thing. So I'm just mixing that together. But apart from that, not that much is different. So I just have a color corrector to sort of darken it a little bit. And I am using alpha. And basically the alpha is just sort of, if you look in here, it just has a little bit of a fade out towards the end. But that's basically what ground shading was like. The glass is another Megascans material. Fucking bugs, man. Jesus fucking Christ. Right. So there's another one. Frost. Why is it not finding that one? But that's another one. It's sort of a frosting effect, which was on the which is on it, and then the reflection is modulated by Fresnel, so it's not as intense on the front as it is on the sides. And the particles, very basic material. Looking up an attribute called alpha. Turning it down a little bit in here, and basically putting it in opacity. And that's everything that's there for the particles. They have a little bit of a color. But yeah, in terms of shading, that's it. Basically, it's honestly not too complex. Right, so this very quickly over the compositing. I wasn't sure if I was gonna even include this, but because it's like there's really not that much to say about the compositing. So it's quite a simple comp. I've done it in After Effects. I know After Effects sucks, whatever, etc, etc. Anyway, there's a couple of wiggle stuff that I did, which is basically, so the position, for example, has a wiggle effect, and that's pointing to the sliders here. So it will just wiggle when the explosion hits. This is all done in a pre-comp. So in the pre-comp I did some of the shockwave stuff. So this is also where the wind effect gets added. So this is the like a separate render of the wind effect. So that's very simple, that one. So it just gets put on top, some color correction stuff. This is also where we have some bulges going on. So I have let's actually give it good names. So yeah, this is just basically a bulge effect with a mask. So what that does is basically it sort of creates this shockwave effect. So it has this a feathered look, and what that does is just really gives this shockwave type of effect, which just looks a lot better. So you have this initial shock, like, and then you have the wind moving through it, and then you have the leaves being blown away by the wind and the shockwave. So yeah, there's that. There's just a couple of, like, there's a little bit of glow here. There's just a little bit of extra optical flare thing, but again, most is in render. If you can see, like, I added, like, this is just the like, if I just show the rough render, for example, like this is the beauty render. So there's really actually not a lot of compositing going on, but as you can see, like, the explosion here is a little meh. So then when you add, like, the bulge, and you get really, and then when you add the wiggle, like some of the color grading here, you really get the shockwave type of effect. So that's some stuff. So yeah, basically that's the compositing thing, and then here in the end I'm doing a little wipe with a little leaf. So so yeah, very short, just the compositing, not a lot going on, but that's the compositing part of it, guys. Yeah, I think that's the entire project. So yeah, I hope you found this whole interesting. It's been quite a long one, I think. I'm not sure how long, because I still have to edit this whole thing, obviously. But yeah, this whole thing was quite long, I think. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for your support again on Patreon. Thanks to all of the patrons, and especially all of my top patrons, of course. Especially Chris Hebert for being a top patron. But everyone, thanks so much. And again, like, it really means a lot to me that I have this support on Patreon, because this really allows me to do these types of things. So actually, I took time off to do from commissioned work to make this personal project and make it into a tutorial, which is something I can afford because Patreon is also bringing in some income, which is very nice. And I really like to hopefully be able to do more of this, because I really enjoy making these tutorials and making this type of content. Anyway, so that was it. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and well, until next time, guys, and stay tuned for another thing that I have coming up, well, probably in December. So yeah, until next time, bye.